Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm a Boeing 737 pilot and a member of PMDG's tech team. In today's video let's talk about the changelog that comes with the PMDG 737-800 and the successive updates of the 600 and 700. Now the actual changelog is very long, so I have already only picked the things that I think are most important, and nonetheless this is probably going to become one of the lengthier videos, at least for those that are only covering changelogs between updates. So, all of that said, let's actually start off. So, there have been quite a couple of fixes related to the new lateral flight path module and route offsets. When you enter speed and altitude restrictions on the VNAV client page, you can now put them on top of already pre-existing restrictions. So, to give you an example of what that means, on the climb restriction here right now it says 250 below 10,000, but if you had an SID that has the speed restriction, for example 220 at waypoint so and so, then you could just overtype something else and it would be entered a level below the speed restriction of the SID. So for example, let's say you wanted to change the 250 below 10,000 restriction, but you had an SID that says 220 at waypoint so and so. You could simply, for example, type 250/6000 and put it right on top of the speed constraint on the VNAV climb page, and it is just going to be accepted a level below the speed constraint and is going to override the 250/10,000 that you would have in there by default. That's a very nice way of changing these when you have a SID that actually has a speed constraint, because it doesn't mean that you have to take the speed constraint out, put the new constraint in, execute it, and then put the speed constraint back in. So it is now finally possible to change between failed passive and failed operational autopilots without the need to go to the ISFD only mode. So let's have a look what that means. We have the ISFD with the RMI installed at the moment, and if we're going into the airline options, we can now go onto fail operational autoland, and the ISFD plus RMI are going to remain in our flight deck. Next up, the ILS DME should not be shown on the navigation display. So if you have an ILS tuned, you should only get dashes over here for the DMEs, and you should only get the DME reading up on the primary flight display. On top of that, a couple more changes have been done to radial and track to intercept impossible path on the lateral flight path module stabilization, so it is going to run a little bit more stable. And a couple of route offsets have been included, or fixes to route offsets have been included as well. Another one is the flight director pop-up mode for takeoff logic has been refined. So this is primarily interesting if the flight director is turned off, you press the toga button, what is going to happen. VNAV MCP light, illuminating when toga is pressed. That is the light, the green light up here on the MCP. Has been changed. And next one, when you enter the altitude acquire mode of the autopilot, so when the airplane tries to intercept an altitude, you can no longer select vertical speed or level change. So once the plane is in alt acquire, it is going to stay there unless you change the MCP altitude. That's exactly what the real one does, and in my personal opinion it is actually a downside of the real AFDS, because if you are climbing at a very high rate of climb and you've forgotten to apply the 3-to-1 rule to decrease your rate of climb, then the plane is going to fly all the way up at, for example, 3,000 feet a minute until it intercepts the altitude. And normally I would like to go vertical speed there and reduce the VS, but that is not possible in the real plane once it's in alt acquire, and now it is no longer possible in the PMDG 737 as well. Next up, the descent path unachievable message logic has basically been removed from the FMC because that one no longer exists in current FMC U14 software. Next up is something that the external power is no longer required to set or release jetways in the ground services. So previously you had to have ground power connected to have the jetway button enabled here. But that is no longer the case. You can now operate the jetways independent of the ground power. For those of you using the Thrustmaster Airbus throttle, there is also quite an improvement there. and that reverse thrust is now possible with the Thrustmaster Airbus hardware. Another one that I personally really appreciate, that most flight simulators are probably not going to care about at all, is when an FMC failure happens, the first indication of it in the real airplane is that where you would normally get the VNAV deviation information, you are going to see the VTK flag showing up on the navigation display. That is usually your first indication that an FMC has failed, and that is now simulated in the PMDG 737. Going on once again up to the MCP, vertical speed 0 in the previous version showed 4 zeros, but that wasn't the case in the actual airplane. So if we go like this to vertical speed with vertical speed 0, the window is just going to stay blank, and only when you put something positive or negative in, it is not going to be blank. So one more that is probably really apparent to those of you who have been on my channel for a very long time is that the main landing gear is, or has not been recognized as extended after a manual gear extension. That's been fixed, so you can expect the manual gear extension to work correctly from now on as well. Next point, the standby altimeter indication used to be wrong when below 0 feet, but that's been fixed now. Another interesting one that we are going to see now is that the escape slides are showing the red flag. So if we go out to an external view of our airplane over here, and we have a look through some of the doors, it's not all that easy to see, but you can kind of see it from the position where we are right now. You can see this red flag inside of the door, and that basically indicates that the slide is armed. So can kind of see it from here as well on the door, that there's the red flag inside now. So another issue that previously used to exist is that the ground power could not be selected with the battery off. That's been fixed. Now you can turn on the ground power without the battery. Another one that was probably a little bit more apparent is that the APU is, or used to use, only the... No, I need to rephrase this. In real life, the APU is using fuel from the left manifold. So that's either the number 1 main tank, so the left wing, or from the center tank if the left AC fuel pump has been turned on. However, on previous PMDG aircraft, it actually used fuel from both main tanks, even while the crossfeed has been closed and all boost pumps had been switched on. That's been fixed. Now it's only going to use it from the left tank. So if you're sitting on the ground with the APU running for a longer time, don't be surprised if you are seeing a fuel imbalance starting to develop. That is now fully correct and as expected. Alright, sorry guys, just had to mute my microphone for a second. Going on then. Another really nice feature that I appreciate very much is that in the FMC on the ident page you can now see which version number of the 737 you are running. So if you have a look over here, op program that previously just used to say 1.00000, now it tells you the version of your 737 that you have installed in your flight simulator. So in my case I'm using version 3.00.0038 in MSFS. So that's just a really nice way to see which version you have installed, and in my opinion it's always better if you have something dynamic in your airplane than something static. Next up, also one of my personal favorites, is the round radio altitude indication that used to be incorrect on the primary flight display. So I'm not sure if the majority of you is even going to recognize it right now, but let me quickly turn the round red out on. So first of all, its position on the PFD has been moved left a little bit. So previously it used to be too much on the right hand side, now it's moved a bit more to the left. And when you're between 70 and 80 knots on the takeoff run, the round scale is actually going to show around the radio altimeter. So that didn't used to be the case in previous versions, but at least to me, as somebody flying with a round radio altimeter every single day 4 sectors, or almost every single day 4 sectors, That was a really apparent error, and that's now luckily been fixed. Another one that some of you may have noticed is that on previous versions of the PMDG 737, on the descent page, if you changed the default to 40 by 10,000 restriction, for example into 250 by 10,000, as it is SOP in the airline I fly for, when you would then execute a direct on the same flight later on, it would revert back to 240. So that's been fixed now. Now, if you change this one, it is going to stay at whatever you changed it to. Also, there is a crash to desktop fixed for reselecting the same approach that you have already done previously. So if you went to an airport, you went around and then you reselected the same approach, there were cases where the FMC would freeze up and probably even crash the simulator to desktop. That's been fixed, so now it doesn't happen anymore. The next one, thank you very much to Flight Deck for Sim for pointing that one out, is that since U14 in the FMC, using speed intervent while in a VNAV path descent is no longer going to put you into VNAV speed mode, but now you are going to get FMC speed as the FMA, plus VNAV path is still going to stay. So the airplane is going to stay on the path that it used to be on, and then you can manipulate the speed with a speed window without the airplane reverting into VNAV speed mode. Another change that has been done to the VNAV system is that holdings have previously not been taken into account correctly for calculating the vertical path of the airplane. That's been fixed. So now holdings are taken into account appropriately. Another small issue here, when the GPS fails, the first indicator that a pilot actually gets about it is that the time on your clock is going to disappear. So let me see if I can quickly create that one for you. Should be under navigation, I think. I should probably have had a look at that previously. Yeah, so now we have a time showing over here, and if we activate the GPS failure, then the time is dashing out, and that is your first indication that a GPS failure has occurred. Keep in mind, under the logic of the Boeing 737 master caution system, for a single GPS failure you're not going to get a master caution pop-up, but it's only going to pop up on recall. So, if I'm now pressing the recall, then we are going to get the GPS light illuminated up here for a single GPS failure. Only for a dual failure it would illuminate the master caution straight away. And note that we can now reset the master caution and the light is going to turn off again with a single failure. With the dual failure it would stay illuminated. But you still have the indication of it on your clock, where you can see that it is that the respective GPS sensor has failed. Going on then, the VNAV deviation scale bracket should expand a contract with the RMP. So that's the one that you normally have in descent on the lower right of your navigation display, and that one should expand a contract depending on the vertical RMP. Right, another change then is that the IRS transfer switch does not allow offsite flight control computer to engage. So that's basically up here, the IRS transfer switches, and that prevented the offsite FCC to engage. That's been fixed. Another one is in the bleed air system, where a bleed overpressure failure needs adjustment from a 220 psi switch and the trip reset logic. So that's been fixed as well. Now the bleed trip system is working correctly. Talking about overpressures, we also have one change in the hydraulic accumulator pressure, which used to be 750 psi, and it's now changed to 1000 psi. And finally, talking about overpressures, the engine bleed 9th stage failure has been changed a little bit as well, and is now working correctly. The last one change that I find very important here that I'm going to point out is that fueling and front cargo loading is now possible at the same time in the 737-800, because there is simply more space available up here. In the smaller versions you couldn't refuel and load your luggage at the same time because there was just not enough space available. In the 800 however there is, so it's possible to refuel and load your luggage at the same time now, therefore expediting the whole turnaround process. So this pretty much covers the changes that I find important. Note that this is not an exclusive list. There have been a lot more changes done. Actually, it would be several pages of changelog, and I'm sure that Robert is probably going to post them somewhere. But for now, these are what I found the most important coming with the release of the 737-800. Of course, those changes are also going to be incorporated into the 600 and the 700s. And be aware that I have only mentioned bug fixes over here and not new features like the new sunshades and stuff like that. So this video is only about bug fixing and things that have changed in relation to system logic. I would like to thank you very much for being with me and bearing with me for 15 minutes over the course of me just giving out some system stuff. So thank you very much for sticking with me. Let me know in the comments below which of those changes you appreciate the most and which of those changes you think would be obsolete. And if you do want to support the channel, you can make a small donation through the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below. Those are always very appreciated because they are what keep the channel running. So thank you very much for considering a donation in advance already. Now, head out to your 737s, enjoy the flights, and I'm looking forward to see you all again on the next one.